Hello to the future. As we mentioned Saturday night, which it is right now as we're shooting this, there are things that we could not talk about in our broadcast, but we can talk about whenever you are watching this.
A couple of the most exciting things, I would say.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like really bummed that these could be on Saturday night.
Yeah.
One of the biggest things at the show, good or bad, however your take may be, Sonic Frontiers.
Blood, based on what I had seen of Sonic Frontiers before this, I went in with very low expectations. Visually, I still think it's pretty bland, but I think that this is a game that will click more with you once you get your hands on it, and I don't think just sitting and watching it really conveys how it feels as a player, and I was genuinely into it. And what I mean by that is Sonic in a more open structure is actually pretty enticing. And I think the way they've laid out these zones is really satisfying to explore because it feels like they kind of take full advantage of the space that you're in. And so what I mean by that is there are different collectibles, and I didn't there's one where you get these hearts and you're trying to restore Amy's memories.
Yeah.
And I don't know what that means.
The demo starts in this kind of weird vibe because Sonic is just laying like a corpse in the rain. Just passed out in the grass.
I mean, we've all been there.
What's happening, Sonic? And they say something about being separated from Amy and Tails. Mm-hmm. And so you're saying, once there's a lot.
We did skip the opening cinematic.
Yeah,
so
they didn't show us that. One thing that did bug me, and hopefully it's not as bad in the final game, is that there was just it felt like you were getting constantly interrupted by tutorial pop-up kind of things.
Yes, that was definitely happening.
Yeah, and one of those things was saying that these little heart things are for Amy. I
definitely forgive the tutorialization because I think it is very different from a traditional 2D or 3D Sonic experience. Mm-hmm. And I assume that entirely goes away once you're used to things, or maybe not, but once you kind of get past the screens interrupting you and telling you information, actually getting into it was fun and satisfying in kind of those short burst moment ways. And I hate to use this example because it's so overused, but I think it does illustrate the point. Very Breath of the Wild, right? So I would think, in Breath of the Wild, you just have those moments where you sort of stumble upon something, maybe it'd be a moblin camp, you know, and you just deal with it. Sort of these organic moments that you would kind of run into. Sonic Frontiers has that where, I would see a collectible in the distance, right? And be okay, how do I get there? Oh, if I go to these boxes and I break the boxes, there's a spring, and then that'll lead me up here. Okay, I bounced up there, but I messed it up and I fell down. So it's okay, I need to go, I need to bounce, and I need to boost, right? And so you're sort of piecing together really what are essentially micro platforming puzzles, right? And you can see on the map, right? It's this thing is here, this thing is here, this thing is here. And so you can kind of go around the environment and just sort of figure things out. But what I mean by using all of the space available, right, is there would be moments where I'd be oh, there's something up, there's a rail in the sky.
Yeah.
Right? And so it's oh, I need to pay attention, I need to be constantly looking above me, not just in front of me. And it's how do I get to that rail, right? And then again, going back to that example of sort of piecing things together, how to get there.
Yeah. And there were things where you had to do multiple times, just figuring out the timing. It seemed a little tricky there.
Yeah, definitely. And it was kind of interesting because there was one heart collectible that I went after where the first time I did it, I almost got it, but then I found out in the next, one of the next attempts that was not the intended way. And so that was kind of a cool moment where it's you're supposed to do this, but I almost got up over here using this other method, right? And so, you think about Sonic, right? And it's very much of you're kind of locked and going forward, I think, in a lot of examples. And so here it was nice to kind of have that playfulness, And you have different tools at your disposal. So I mentioned the boost, but there will also be like these balloons that will pop, and you use the homing attack to pop and kind of elevate yourself from one point to another.
There's also a skill tree.
There's also a skill tree.
Which is interesting. The first one that was unlocked, they showed in the earlier demo, it's called a Psy Loop, where you kind of have like a line that follows Sonic.
Yeah.
And anytime you complete a circle, you would just get rings.
Yeah.
Which is interesting.
Yeah. So if you just do it like kind of on nothing.
Yeah, but then you can also circle around, kind of like some of those Kirby games. You can circle around different devices. The one example they showed before was like when you circle around the torches, you kind of extinguish the torches.
Yep.
There was this one enemy that you fought where you're like, it was like a hard shelled kind of enemy. Mm-hmm. And when you circle it, then the shell kind of pops up in the air and gives you an advantage to like pummel the enemy before it pops back down.
Yeah, and that was something that I think was actually conveyed pretty well in the demo. And again, it was a very tutorialized area. But
yeah, it wasn't even very wide open, right? It was kind of like
it was segmented,
like a funnel until you got to like a bigger space.
Yeah,
which is about when our time ran out.
But you had like very basic enemies that I felt like you could just easily just mash the homing attack and get through them, right? Just normal mobs essentially.
Which was like woefully missing in the earlier the videos we saw before. It was like, is there anything out here? Or,
yeah,
just
things
running around. Yeah,
you deal with very easily. And then you have these like boss encounters, and they're more involved. Where I feel like I was locked in an arena against this boss, and it had like twin blade arms, and it had different.
They actually called it a ninja.
Attacks. Yeah. And so, that was a little bit more complicated, right? And then you have the armored enemy where you had to use a totally different technique where you're trying to trace around it to get it so its shell pops up and you can attack it. And
There's another one that you fought that they called a tower. And it had like a spinning thing at the top, and it was like shooting out.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so they're like, hey, use the dodge that you have. And what's interesting is you have to be locked on to dodge on the ground, but then if you jump, you can dodge even if you're not locked on, which is interesting. And again, kind of going to the open world aspect, I got hit by that thing that I was fighting, and then I was like, oh man, I need rings. And it's like, I can just run away from this thing, and there are rings up on this rock, and I can go there. And so again, like that kind of openness was interesting for the Sonic design, because if you think of like a classic 2D Sonic boss, right, you just have to frantically try to pick up the rings that drop when you get hit, and you can do that here as well, which
what was interesting with that tower thing is because it was like you were like knocking like the levels of it out from beneath it, so you like knock a piece out, but then once it got so low that the spinning part was basically on the ground, then it kind of changed into like a top, and so you had to approach it differently.
I honestly, the approach didn't feel that different because like I was hitting its bottom and then I had to hit the top, but I didn't feel like I really had to do that much that was different. But yeah, I think all these fights on their own are pretty simple, but it was nice even in the short time that we had that it felt like there was a good variety in terms of the style of fights, which was cool. There are also these like little birds that are
the Cocos?
that are littered around that you can go and collect.
Yeah, they said you take them to the Elder, but we did not find the Elder yet.
Yeah, and I don't know what rewards you're given for doing so.
Hopefully not a piece of poop.
But yeah, so there are classic Sonic things. There are spring pads. There's like the Sonic Adventure like things that you grab on there and that are attached to a rope, and then you go up. There's rails, and then when you're on the rails, you just hit left or right to switch between them. But I think overall, the thing that I want to say is it very much had that kind of Breath of the Wild experience. It's something that was really intoxicating about Breath of the Wild, where I just had fun poking around this world and trying to figure things out and going at my own pace. and really trying to see how many things that I could uncover. Again, that playfulness was really fun, and I felt like it was one of those games where I was like, I just want to keep sitting here and getting all the things off the map, right? And I think any game that can put that in you is good. A concern that I have is you think about 3D Sonic, and that's very much present here. Sonic is a little squirrely, right? And so when you have a lot of room to move, and you can really take full advantage of that speed, no problems, right? And there are a lot of control things that you can do. There's wall running. There's like a counter that you can do. Like he has a pretty, or it seemed like decently expansive repertoire of things available to him. But when you get to the more precision platforming, where it's like, oh, I'm just jumping from this floating square to that floating square. It was definitely doable, right? Like you can do it. I didn't feel like the controls were so squirrely that I wasn't able to accomplish those things, but it definitely felt looser than I would have liked. But what was interesting at the beginning of the demo, you can choose a high-speed mode, which they recommend for people familiar with Sonic games, and then there is also an action mode, which I didn't do, which they recommend for people not familiar with Sonic games. And so I wonder
what that's like.
Those differences are. Yeah. I was not expecting to walk away from this demo being like, man, I'm really excited to play more of that, but that is 100% how I feel.
Yeah. It's interesting because it's like, as you're saying, like, the difference of being hands-on, because I just let you play the whole time. I didn't grab it, and it's like it's still not quite grabbing me. But I also, at the same time, I feel like they did a kind of a disservice to this game the way that they rolled it out. And some of those criticisms are still there. Like they're still like, the environment still looks kind of weird, and
totally
the way things pop in is like, okay, that's strange, especially like elements like the rails and all of that, and like the just things that are, like rough for seemingly no reason. Like when you would smash like a crate or another container, like the frame rate would be really low on like how it would break apart. Yeah,
I think that's totally true. There is this roughness there. Like I would try to go and interact with something, and the prompt wouldn't come up. And I'd have to like go away and then come back, and then it's like, okay, the prompt came up. So yeah, there's definitely.
Yeah, I saw one time like it flew off. Like you were like jumping off a rail, and you like, flew off the side instead of going where you're trying to go.
Sure. Yeah. Again, that kind of squirreliness. So definitely, I think there's plenty of criticism to levy at the demo that we played, but
seeing it actually populated with enemies.
Yeah.
Seeing it actually populated with collectibles.
Right.
Like all of that stuff makes a big difference, because those things give the world more of a sense of purpose.
Right. And
there's more than that too that like we can't even get into yet. But there's more objective to this game than the earlier demos made seem. And
I do think, like, I wonder how I would feel if I was watching you play. Because I do think there really is something to getting your hands on it and actually being the one that is, attempting these little micro puzzles and having the freedom to go where you want to go. And so I'm hesitant to like sit here and fully endorse this and be like, yeah, this is going to be amazing. I don't know that, because it was a super, super, super tiny section of this game. But I'm like way more on board with it than I was expecting to be, and that purely came from the hands-on time.
Cool. Yeah. Gonna be interesting to see.
Yeah.
Where it goes from here.
Right. And how we feel once we get significantly more time. So
thanks for checking it out, and we got more coming at you.